Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. It is time for the March Q&A, which we are filming in March. Just to be, we may not get it edited and out in March, but just to be clear, this was filmed in March. So it is still technically the March Q&A, and there won't be two April Q&As.
We will take the technicality on this one.
Yeah, we're going to have to. So, Q&A time. We've asked you guys questions. You've given us loads of answers. It looks like there's a good variety this month. I've had a brief look at them, so we'll jump into them in a second. But before we do, today's video sponsor is Thermal Grizzly and their Cryonaut Extreme, which is now available in a 2-gram syringe. This high-performance thermal paste delivers maximum thermal conductivity thanks to an extremely small particle size and layer thickness. It's also very flexible, capable of standing up to sub-zero temperatures for extreme overclocking, but also performs exceptionally well for air and water cooling applications. So if your CPU or GPU needs repasting, then I suggest checking out the Thermal Grizzly range. Link is in the video description.
All right, we've got two pretty related questions, so I'm going to read both of them out here. We've got one that asks, do you consider Windows 11 a mature enough operating system? When will be a good time to upgrade from 10 to 11? And the second question is, what do you guys think of Windows 11? I just built an Alder Lake machine. Initially went with Windows 10, then this person went and fresh installed to 11, ended up running into a bunch of little issues with things here and there. So, and this user ended up reinstalling Windows 10. So I guess, yeah, what are our thoughts on Windows 10 and would we consider sort of upgrading to it for now? So are you using Windows 11 on your main PC?
So I initially upgraded my AMD and Intel test systems to Windows 11, but I also kept my Windows 10 installed, so I had 4 SSDs in total. And the reason was that, Alder Lake, Windows 11 schedule and stuff, so we thought we'd update to that. And we thought, if you're building a new computer, it probably makes sense to install Windows 11 because the upgrade process can be a bit janky and it's just better to do a fresh install. If you're going to go to all that effort, you might as well use the latest operating system that's going to be supported moving forward. And I was looking at upgrading my personal system to Windows 11 quite recently now. The reason I haven't is because I bought the new Panasonic GH6 camera, which films in 5.7K, or it can. That's what I've been using it in. And for some reason, Premiere is happy on Windows 10. Import the footage, works perfectly fine. Windows 11, I've tried absolutely everything, cannot get it to work. You get a low-level exception error. I've Googled the hell out of it. I've tried disabling hardware encoding. I've tried disabling stuff like core isolation, VBS features. I've tried everything. I cannot get it to work on Windows 11. Windows 10 works fine on every system. The reason I discovered that was because we have a new video editor who comes on site here, and I've got a system here for him, and it was his own personal operating system install, which is Windows 11. And that's how we discovered. So I had to reconfigure his whole system using Windows 10 just so we could edit the footage with the new camera. So that was annoying. So that having learnt that, I was like, well, I'm definitely not upgrading to Windows 11 because I have not got time for those kinds of headaches. And so far we haven't worked out a workaround. My Windows 10 works flawlessly. No dramas at all.
That's why I haven't upgraded either. Just using it as a production system, I needed to work flawlessly with limited downtime from the upgrade process.
And early on, benchmarking on Windows 11 is a nightmare because I've discovered a bug which, to my knowledge, no one's talked about, which I find quite unbelievable. But I've verified this. I potentially will make a video at some point. I was kind of hoping they would just solve it so it would become a non-issue. And this isn't because I'm trying to, hide any issues with Radeon GPUs or whatever. It's just that it's not generally the content we make and it's a lot of work. But basically, if you put a Radeon GPU on a Windows 11 system and install the drivers, and then you had, say, a GeForce GPU in there before, it's really bizarre. When you install the drivers and run a benchmark, you get the full performance. And if you check the latency of the CPU, the L3 latency and the DRAM latency in particular, it's exactly what you'd expect it to be. But then when you reset the system, half the time it completely buggers the performance and latency for the DRAM goes through the roof. And then you have to DDU, remove the driver, install it again. And sometimes it takes 3 installs before the point that you reset, it preserves the performance and doesn't. And I've recorded all this, it's highly repeatable. So I don't know what's going on there. I don't think it happens with GeForce drivers. Definitely happens with Radeon drivers in Windows 11. Doesn't happen in Windows 10. So benchmarking was a nightmare to get accurate numbers. Otherwise, Radeon GPUs can drop by like 10, 20% in performance on Windows 11 after you. So there's a bit more to it than that. That's the short version. But yeah, I don't know. If I was a gamer in particular, I wouldn't be that keen to jump to Windows 11.
Yeah. Interesting question, this one. Do you think waiting for next-gen GPUs is worth it if current GPUs reach MSRP? I think I recently did a poll on our Twitter.
I don't even think you should try and
asking
answer
people.
this without your crystal ball.
Well, I got the crystal ball, but it's out there, so
Okay.
I won't get the magic of the ball this
We're going to
time.
wing it.
We'll wing it.
We're going to wing it.
Yeah, should you buy at MSRP or should you wait?
You got to preface this by saying that you have no idea. You have
got
no
no
control over the markets. You have no idea if there's going to be some unforeseen thing that's going to make
Yep.
cards way more expensive or shortages or whatever. Like right now, could very well be the absolute best. Like what are they, like 30%? Some cards are 30% over MSRP still. Right now, as in today, could be the best time to buy a GPU for the next 3 years. Unlikely, but could
Yep.
be. So we're not giving you any kind of investing advice on GPUs.
Not investing advice.
Because we have no idea. Like, and yeah, I'll let you talk first. Sorry, you finish your sentence.
So I think AIBs, distributors, retailers, the GPU makers have learnt a lot of lessons this generation.
Okay.
And the lessons are not good for consumers. The lessons are we can charge a lot of money. And it doesn't matter what the MSRP is. We can still charge a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
And I would be astonished if the next generation GPUs are at their MSRP, whatever they are claimed to be, and they could be very high. I would be shocked if a significant volume of those cards sold at that MSRP within the first several months, 3 months, 6 months, whatever. I would be blown away if everything we've seen over the last 2 years and suddenly next-gen GPUs launch at the MSRP. I just don't think it's going to happen. I think it's unrealistic to expect that. So you're kind of tossing up, you know, how much of a performance gain are they going to get? And obviously we don't know what the price to performance ratio is going to be like. But I think there's a genuine case to be made that even just before next-gen cards launch, that you may genuinely get a good deal buying an old GPU at the MSRP, because if they're immediately discontinued, supply goes to crap.
That was the case with like the 1080 Ti. Why did they get down to like $400 brand new?
Yes, yeah. So I think a thing that I personally would be looking at is what we saw right before Ampere launch was a lot of people sold their last gen GPUs for very cheap. Like 2080 Ti's were being sold for, once the 3070 was announced to be the same sort of performance as a 2080
It was like $400 they're selling for.
Yeah, they were selling for like $400 on
Yeah.
eBay. So I'd be strongly considering that as an option. I think that will really set you up if it goes down that way. But I think there is a case to be made that the prices at MSRP today will stack up favorably compared to next-gen pricing.
Yeah,
especially
definitely.
because how likely is it they launch an RTX 4060 within the next 6 months, within the 6 months of the next-gen launch?
Well, yeah, and a few things to keep fresh in your mind, refresh, let's say, is the fact that forever and a day, whenever a new GPU comes out, and it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's mid-range, low-end, high, well, mid-range to high-end, you've never been able to buy it straight away. At least it hasn't been readily available. Most of the time it's out of stock. I think it even happened with like an RX 480 type product. And it took many, many weeks until they were sort of dripping in, and then it was months before you could just go and get one. It's like, oh, I want an RX 480, go to the shop and you get one for MSRP. It was months before that happened. And since then, there's significantly more people interested in PC gaming, and there's many more challenges with logistics and supply and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and simply the challenge that there will still be people who might have bought a GPU in this past generation if they could get their hands on one at a reasonable price that are still waiting today, and that waiting may flow over into the next generation.
Yep.
So
there's certainly a lot of people already that are, which is why we're answering this question.
So I think, especially if the rumors of the performance increases are true, then it's going to be one of the most impressive GPU launches in quite a while, which is only going to exacerbate the demand, people wanting to jump on those cards. And I think if we see just the high-end cards launch to begin with, and maybe that only the high-end cards will be available for several months, I think those cards are going to be very difficult to buy.
I think it'd be at least 6 months.
Yeah, and very difficult to buy at the MSRP if they were available.
Yeah.
So I think...
Well, you're saying you're expecting like a 4060 like 3 months after release.
I would be shocked if it was 3 months.
Yeah.
I think 6 months plus
for
a mid-tier GPU.
Yep.
So I think, obviously, this isn't a simple question to answer because it really depends on the class of GPU you're thinking of buying, how close to the launch, what are your expectations and all those sorts of things. But I think if you're interested in a mid to low tier card, like if you're interested in, say, like a 3050, 3060 type product, then buying at MSRP right before next gen is going to be pretty solid because I don't think a card will compete with that for some time.
It's the safest. It's a safe bet.
Whereas if you're buying a 3090 Ti, which admittedly just launched right before the launch of next gen cards, which is kind of right now, it doesn't make a lot of sense. That I'd be waiting interested in the next gen. So it depends.
It never made a lot of sense, but it makes the least amount of sense.
It makes no sense now. So it's a tricky question to answer. There's lots of things going on, but I think there could be a case for MSRP cards, but we'll see. Would you be impressed if the RTX 4090 is twice as fast as the 3090 but consumes 600 watts like the leaks suggest? Where do you draw the line between power and performance? And the second related question is there a reason why we're moving towards such power-hungry CPUs and GPUs? Do the manufacturers not care about power efficiency in desktop parts anymore, or are we in a point where it is necessary for parts to chug down power? And then again gives the example of 40 series GPUs potentially consuming 600 watts. So this whole
few things to delve into there.
Yeah, this whole power consumption thing is really blowing up at the moment. Maybe like some gigabyte power supplies in terms of how the next generation of parts, sort of the thinking of them being super power hungry. And we were just talking about this recently on the live stream that we did for our Patreon members. And I think we both think that it gets overblown pretty quickly when the talk of power consumption comes up. It would be a pretty significant issue if the mid-range products like let's say a 4060 or 4050 was suddenly 600 watt, 500 watt parts. But there's no indication that that's the case. We're only talking about the flagship Halo products where performance is going to be the highest, sort of like your 3090 Ti, like what we just saw.
It's kind of like rewind a bit to, let's say we're back at Turing, and the rumors suggest that the next generation Ampere cards, they're going to suck down 450, some models 500 watts. That's crazy, like, out of control. And that's like, that did turn out to be the case, but it's for a Halo product, as Tim said, but it's a product that's going to sell in such low volumes that it's how relevant is it to representing Ampere, whereas most of the Ampere GPUs were 200, 250, 300 watts. So half 600 watts, but a lot less than the 450, 500 watts that the Halo product consumes. So for this is going to what we're talking about, a 3090 Ti class product. And I think that leads into answering the question of why. And the reason is that Nvidia has realized they can make stupid, out-of-control products, charge boatloads of money for them, and people will buy them simply because they're the best of the best. They don't need to be that practical. Like, they're not concerned about whether someone has a 1,000-watt power supply and sufficient case cooling and all that kind of stuff. It's like, it's for people who buy the best of the best. So they have the best case with great airflow. They've got a 1,000+ watt power supply because they can, and they want a stupid GPU to justify all of that, even if it's only 10% faster, and they have to pay 100% more for it.
Yeah, exactly. I think we've even seen this with the 12th gen CPUs, where a bit of that line was kind of, the perception was altered by the fact that 12900K was so power hungry, but then you go down to a Core i5 part, and it was actually pretty efficient.
Even the Core i7.
Yeah, so compared to AMD's parts, they look pretty good. Whereas you compare at the top end, and it's like, whoa, that Core i9's using a lot of power. So I think a lot of the expectations when it comes to power for these next-gen parts really needs to be tempered as to, are you talking just about the stupid Halo products that don't make a lot of sense, are really for the whale buyers that are going to suck up all those sorts of products, or are there actually issues for the mainstream mid-range products in the sort of the $600 and lower price tiers? And so really what we're looking for is the efficiency, the performance per watt of the part. So it would be bad if the next generation lines from AMD and Nvidia had no improvements to performance per watt. If we were sitting here and to get the significant performance gains, power has gone up heaps. But if we're sitting there and performance per watt has increased substantially, then it's not an issue. Like if you're getting a 200 watt GPU and it's now 50-60% faster than what we got last generation, that's a really significant step forward, even if that top end card is consuming 600 watts because Nvidia's just gone, let's make a 600 watt GPU.
Basically, Nvidia's worked out people will pay extreme prices for extreme hardware, and there's a lot more people that are willing to do that now than maybe there was 5-10 years ago.
In previous generations that were like 500, 600 watt cards because they put two 300 watt GPUs or two 250 watt GPUs on a single board. And this next generation is just a continuation of that. Dual GPU graphics cards are not effective anymore. Like they weren't great for scaling. The benefit of the second GPU was poor. And now SLI and Crossfire aren't really a thing. And now we're sort of, we've had this dip where we went from dual GPUs to single GPUs. And then now we're just going back the other side with potentially multi-die or just really large single-die GPUs. So it's not like this is the first time that we'll be seeing these expensive, power-hungry GPUs.
Yeah, we don't know that they'll reach 600 watt. Previously, I would have thought just doesn't seem practical or feasible. But having seen the 450 watt models, how well they perform as in terms of cooling and acoustics, quite surprised how cool they run and how quiet they are. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, and I think...
they're massive.
I think as well previously, a lot of GPU designs were... Part of the design process was thinking about people using two GPUs in the one system. So a lot of the top tier designs, they didn't want to go to like 3 slots or 4 slots because they thought, oh, well, if someone puts a second one of these in and uses SLI, you can't make it 4 slots because no motherboard's going to accept that.
Yep.
Whereas today, like 4 slot GPU coolers, as ridiculous as it sounds, most people have the space in their case to accommodate that, even if it ends up blocking a whole bunch of PCI slots. Like you're not using those slots.
Most people aren't.
Most people aren't. So I guess companies think they can get away with this. And then even further to that, we've seen liquid-cooled GPU options before, even first-party ones like AMD's done liquid-cooled editions a couple of times. So there's all sorts of things that they can do to mitigate these powerful GPUs. So yeah, it'll be very interesting to see how it goes.
Alrighty, BuildZoid has said that DDR5 boards really shouldn't be supporting more than 2 sticks of DDR5 because of the massive degradation in performance going from 2 to 4 sticks. Okay. Given BuildZoid is the type of guy that knows what he's talking about, BuildZoid has no idea. That's why he just talks for ages. He confuses you and goes around and says, BuildZoid's very knowledgeable. Do you think when AM5 and Intel's 13th gen launch, we will see a greater range of boards with only 2 DIMM slots? I definitely don't think that's going to be a thing. I really don't have enough experience because I haven't done the testing, but I did the other day put 2 32GB kits in a system and I didn't notice any degradation in performance. But look, BuildZoid may be being taken out of context here. As I said, I don't have enough experience or enough knowledge of what he's talking about. Maybe he's talking about overclocking higher frequencies. I'm not sure.
I think this comes around from the confusion that there was around the supported memory spec for 12th gen at the moment where it supports DDR5 4800 natively with the minimum spec configuration.
I was testing 5200.
Yeah, but it drops down quite a way if you're getting to like dual rank configuration,
which I suspect BuildZoid's talking about.
I think it drops down to as far as like maybe 3600.
It tanks,
which is quite a big degradation. But I think people that know what they're doing are probably going to, especially people that look at QVL lists and that sort of thing, are going to understand that that's the case. And there's I wouldn't say that's a reason to restrict the amount of ports.
Yes, that's right. I mean, you can get higher, which is BuildZoid would care about higher frequency memory, which you will get with 2 DIMM slot boards. But I think for most people, they'll do what you've said. They'll want, you can get 32GB kits, which is plenty for gaming, and they'll get you 6000, 6200, 6400 kit, and that'll should work, providing the motherboard BIOS support is there. And they won't add another one of those kits because they don't need 64GB of RAM. But if you're someone who does a bit of video editing on their 12th gen system, as well as gaming, and you want 64 gigs or you want 128 gigs, and that requires 4 sticks, you'll be running at DDR5 5200, which really at that point you probably should just use DDR4, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, and you wouldn't want that option to be restricted by excluding it to just 2 DIMMs for the people that only buy 2 DIMMs. You still want those options.
Yeah, so I disagree with the 2 DIMM take. I think having the flexibility there to run more memory but at a lower frequency is good.
And all you need to do is just look, if you're ever concerned about 4 sticks being an issue, just go to that motherboard website, check the QVL list, and it will tell you the kits and speeds that you can expect when running in four-stick configuration.
Most of our audience knows this. It's been that way for
a long time.
Basically. All right, Tim. I'm seeing some Tim buzzwords here. Do you think RSR could ever be updated to include temporal data like DLSS and FSR 2.0, or would it be essentially impossible to implement in a simple driver toggle given its temporal nature?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be possible. Certainly when speaking to Nvidia and AMD about whether they could do this, the answer has always been no. I think there's been some rumors at times that maybe Nvidia would introduce DLSS into the driver, but they've been very consistent that it's not possible. And it's not so much about some of the temporal data like previous frames. Like theoretically, the driver could accumulate the past frames it's been delivering somewhere and do something with that information. But the key thing that the driver won't have access to is really things like motion vectors, which are key for reducing ghosting for temporal solutions. Like they need to know how far an object has moved from one frame to the next and by how much. So by having that data, that goes into these algorithms and it significantly reduces those artifacts. And we've all seen ghosting in games that have used like poor TAA implementations and even some DLSS games. It's really ugly. So you wouldn't want that in a driver-based solution. And I think it just wouldn't be feasible.
The driver overhead alone wouldn't make it feasible.
Yeah, so there'd be a lot of driver overhead. You'd still have the issues that we see with RSR, things like having to upscale the user interface, which, especially for DLSS, if you wanted to, say, upscale 1080p to 4K, there'd be quite a quality loss on the UI on a 4K display. And then obviously, at best, you could use a couple of prior frames, but even then, DLSS and FSR, I know DLSS does, not sure about FSR, they use jittering. So even between each frame, they slightly shift the position of the frame, so they capture more data overall from between each frames. The driver's not going to be able to do that. So again, it's just not really a feasible thing. So I don't think we'll see it implemented.
In what department of AMD, Nvidia, or Intel would you like to work in? So if you were to leave me, Tim, where would you go if you were to work at one of those companies?
It's probably different from most of the companies. At Intel, I would love to work in their naming division because I think I could really
Based on evidence, I don't think you'd have to head up and begin a naming division because I'm pretty sure they just like bounce off, like the shorter straw has to deal with that.
I'll start a naming division.
Okay, start one.
And I'll make their products be named properly, which I think will be good.
Okay, so you're not a fan of Arc 3, Arc 5?
Well, the GPUs aren't the problem. It's the laptop parts and stuff.
Well, that's true, yes.
Probably similar to Nvidia, they do need a naming division to not make two GPUs that are the same, have different names, or have different products have the same name and stuff like that.
I think it'd come up against the ethics department if you started their naming department.
I think I would be a naming expert at a lot of these companies. At monitor companies, I could be a naming expert.
You've called me plenty of names.
Yeah, that's true. But I don't think those names could be used by
They're not marketable.
No, I don't think they would be appropriate.
HR might be onto you.
AMD often doesn't really need a naming division, so they probably
just steal everyone else's crappy names.
They do, they do. Motherboards.
So they've outsourced the naming department.
Yeah.
So you're going with naming department.
Yeah, I think naming department.
Okay, well, I'm glad you took that seriously. Yeah, honestly, I couldn't do it, I don't think. No. But if I had to, if Nvidia were like, you have to work for us, we love your content so much, and they had a gun to my head and said, you have to work for us.
They've loved our content. That would be a surprise.
Yeah, well, when that happens, probably nothing to do with sales, nothing to do with marketing. Having said that, I wouldn't mind being the guy that does all the benchmarking and testing to make like review guides and liaise with like media on testing.
The internal testing team, I think, would be...
So basically do what I'm doing now, but for the one company, which wouldn't be as good.
The thing would hurt me as... In this situation, I'd be an ex-reviewer, would be having to create benchmarks that are meant to like manipulate or deliberately...
You wouldn't really... You just benchmark everything... Like you do like my 40 game benchmarks and then you'd be like, and there's the 10 games it sucks in. And then there you go. Now it's not 10% faster, it's 17% faster. You
palm that off to the chief cherry picker who can do all that stuff for you. But
I give them the data because I couldn't do it.
But yeah, I agree. I don't think I could work at these companies
no way.
having done this job.
No
So,
way.
Maybe in 20 years I'll have started work at one of these companies. You'll find this clip from this thing. You'll be like, you sell out. But we'll see. Future Tim.
Now, this is an interesting question that got a surprising amount of upvotes, but there's always, for me at least, a surprising amount of interest around this. So I'll read it out, and I'm interested to see what your thoughts are on this as well. Because maybe sometimes I do things different to everyone else. I don't know. Am I the loop on this one? We'll find out, especially once we get to the comments. In the latest motherboard reviews, you've made a point in highlighting the connectivity, especially the USB ports. Love USB ports. Think like BuildZoid. Love my USB ports. So good. Is audio any part of the consideration for you? Not necessarily in regards to the quality, but support of stereo versus multi-channel, which, whatever, it's a feature of it. But for me, I find that interesting, and that there was quite a few upvotes on that. I find that interesting because I used to kind of care about how good the audio was on my motherboard and what features it had and what options for stereo versus multi-channel, that sort of stuff, like 15 years ago, maybe, like when I cared about optical drives. But like optical drives, I have not used motherboard onboard audio in well over a decade. And there's been almost no option for me to use it. So at the moment, I have the Creative Katana 2 soundbar. Bloody awesome, that thing. And I just use the USB audio for that. Sounds amazing, works great. And then I've got a pair of high-end Corsair gaming headset that I use for gaming or whenever I want to use a headset, and that's wireless USB. So I don't use, on my TRX 40 motherboard, I don't use the onboard audio. It might as well not be there. I was actually thinking about the other day, I'm like, wow, we're almost at the point, at least for me, where onboard audio on motherboards is something that you shouldn't really offer, as crazy as that might sound, because I've got 1,000 different types of audio devices, from audio recorders to headphones to speakers, everything, and they all use USB, and they work just fine. And if you really care about audio, wouldn't you get like a DAC or an internal sound card?
So I still do use the onboard audio, and I do use multi-channel. So when I game, I don't use a headset. I just have like surround sound speakers.
Yeah, because
like
you're casual.
Fairly like old, like Logitech setup. From back in the days when Logitech used to make a lot of those sort of surround sound setups and stuff. And that's been perfectly fine for me. But again, if they got rid of that feature, I would just buy like a USB to, multi-channel audio. And
if you're sort of an audio snob, you'd buy like a DAC or something.
Yeah, I think the quality, I don't understand the quality argument. I've never understood that, because I think if you do genuinely care about audio, the motherboard audio quality will never satisfy you.
Yeah, that's fair.
And you should always use some sort of external device. I know there's very expensive DACs that people really get for their high-end headphones and stuff.
I mean, there's really good quality sound cards that are very inexpensive.
Yeah.
That are significantly better than any onboard audio.
I don't think you even need like a PCI card, but just a USB.
Well, there's plenty of options
or whatever the option is. But I agree with you. I think these days the majority of people are probably using some sort of USB device or Bluetooth, or there's so many Bluetooth headsets these days. Phones don't have audio jacks in them anymore.
Yeah,
so
I asked around with a lot of my mates that I game with and I know game, and none of them use the little they haven't used them for a long time. So I'd be interested to know how many people actually do use them opposed to who don't.
Yeah, especially for people that use headsets, because I think it is still worth having one or two 3.5mm jacks on there just for like legacy devices, and especially having the HD audio, the header on the motherboard, so you can run your front channel audio for your case. But I think for a lot of people, they're probably not using it, especially the rear ones, and especially multi-channel. So I guess when I see boards and I see they've got, the 3 versus 6 tends to be the standard configurations.
3 or 5, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it really matters too much. Like, especially the options you've got. There's so many options these days to expand on that if you don't have what's required. Whereas USB ports, you can add-in USB ports, and you can, like cards that have extra USB ports, you can get, what do they call them? Docks and stuff.
Like hubs and all those.
Hubs, but hubs are always garbage. Like hubs are garbage compared to the motherboard ones. So, I think it's much more important to have a ton of USB ports rather than having like the top end audio configurations.
Oh, absolutely. I would happily sacrifice onboard audio for some extra USB.
Yeah.
But Yeah, I mean, again, you guys let me know what you think. Am I way off base here? Am I out of touch with what you guys do? As I said, for me and all of my friends, that isn't something we use. None of my kids use the onboard audio. I'm surprised to hear Tim does, actually.
Well, do you think I game with a headset or with speakers? Because I've always used...
Well,
I'm not a fan of gaming with a headset.
Well, yeah, because you don't competitively game or play multiplayer. You can't play any multiplayer shooter with a soundbar. Like you'd have no idea where people are. You've got to use a headset. Like,
well, I do use surround sound, but
but it's not the same thing as headphones. Like hearing someone around. I'm telling you now, like it's just not the same. I hope that people who play competitively or semi-competitively better back me up in the comments.
I imagine most people who play competitively would use headphones.
I don't like wearing headphones personally. I found most uncomfortable, especially for hours on it.
That's why I don't, basically.
But it gives you such an advantage in hearing where people are compared to even good surround sound. It's a big difference. But anyway, we've probably covered that one enough. Let me know what you guys think. Regardless of what the feedback is, I don't think we'll ever test that stuff. I mentioned the audio generally on the boards, but just because it has a certain amount of ports doesn't mean it's good. It can be absolutely garbage with tons of crosstalk and it can be really bad. So you've actually got to test the quality to see if the solution's any good. But then if you really care about that, as we've said, there's endless options. So let's move on.
All right, Steve, you're the Asrock man around here. Has Asrock responded to your B660 coverage, exposing the HDV again, or the weak performance of the Pro RS? Do you think they'll improve in the future?
Well, they haven't contacted me, which isn't surprising. And do I think they'll improve? No. Initially, I thought maybe they would. They'd see the light like a lot of these other companies have. But it's been years now that we've been blacklisted by Asrock, and the same is true for Gamers Nexus and actually hardcore overclocking. And recently, I went back and I had a look at. You guys have heard me mention Kit Guru on the channel before. So, they're a pretty underrated channel. They do a lot of good testing and stuff like that. And they looked at, I believe it was an ITX Asrock motherboard over a year ago now. It might even be as far back as 2 years ago. And they slammed it in the thumbnail. I can't remember the exact thumbnail. We can probably chuck that up on screen for you. But it was something about hot VRMs, the board running way too hot. And basically they just found that, the VRM was extremely underwhelming. The board ran too hot and they ripped the board a new one for that, which is fair enough. And their testing was accurate. There's nothing they got wrong. And I noticed since then they hadn't reviewed a single Asrock motherboard. So I reached out to them, sent them a private message, and heard back from them. And basically, they had a similar experience to us. Now, they're not willing to say they were blacklisted because...
Different circumstances.
Basically, they released a couple of negative Asrock motherboard reviews that were completely honest, accurate, fair. Asrock replied saying, "You're hurting our business. Can you please change the content?" They said no. So they sort of went their separate ways. Asrock basically wasn't interested in working with them anymore. They weren't necessarily interested in working with Asrock because they didn't want to be forced to change their editorial direction. They didn't want to, not test certain aspects of the board or falsify information, which is essentially what they were being asked to do. So they no longer work with Asrock. So it's just... And so I said to them, so you've been blacklisted? And they said, well, not really, because we just didn't pursue them anymore because we weren't interested in having them try and get us to change content. So I consider that a blacklisting personally because I know if they reached out to Asrock and said, basically Asrock said to them, we're only going to send you samples under conditions. It has to be positive coverage. And therefore they don't work with them anymore. So I consider that a blacklisting. They didn't, but regardless, Asrock wanted them to provide positive coverage and they said no. So we had a discussion with our Patreon or Floatplane members on a live stream earlier, and I think I'll continue doing the things the way I am, but I'm sort of in two minds about promoting Asrock products in any shape or form because of how dishonest the company is. You had a few thoughts about it, but...
Yeah, I mean, people can go back and watch the live stream if you're interested in... I think it was quite a long discussion.
Yeah.
But just to summarize my points, I think when it comes to reviewing the motherboards, I still think that it does a service to viewers to know which motherboards are bad, especially because Asrock tends to have the cheapest board in a series. So people are often going to be searching for that product. Sort by lowest is common. you want to know that that board sucks so you can avoid it. But then if you're only looking at Asrock's bad products, you're kind of being unfair to the company. You don't want to just constantly target their bad stuff and never look at their good stuff. You have to give a fair balance, I think, which means that if you wanted to give a service to viewers, you kind of also have to cover the good stuff, which is, again, then you have to sort of mention the ethical issues of the company. So it becomes a whole mess, and I don't think there's a great solution there. I don't think it's like, yes, we should versus no, we shouldn't cover their products. I think there's pros and cons, as there often is on either side.
It's so tough because
but yeah, I agree. I don't think it's right. It doesn't sit well with me to
promote a company that's extremely dodgy to media.
Yeah, to promote a company that isn't willing to.
If they're behaving that poorly with us, if you guys have an RMA problem or any kind of technical support issue, how honest and how willing are they going to be to support you when they want to hide those products from you? I think that from the start, that's been a big problem. Like, back when we were in contact with Asrock, they were more than happy to send us, and you'll see it from other reviewers who still cover their boards, the Tai Chi, the Steel Legend, if it was particularly good. Like, any of those sort of mid-range to high-end boards, they were more than happy to throw those at us, as many as we wanted. But when where the relationship fell apart was I requested the lower-end boards, and they're like, oh, we're not sampling those. I'm like, well, could you please get me one? I really want it. No, we're not going to. I'm like, well, I'm going to buy it and cover it. And they weren't happy with that at all. They basically wanted to block all media from testing entry-level boards. They did not want their entry-level boards tested, and they still don't want them. So you won't see any other media testing the HDV unless they've bought it themselves. The Phantom Gaming 4, for example, like the B660 Phantom Gaming 4. Go try and find a review on that. I'm interested to see if anyone's covered it. I don't expect that Asrock would have sampled that board, and I would say that's their mainstream B660 board, the Phantom Gaming 4. I don't see if I'm wrong. Try and find a review on it. I haven't actually looked for one, but I would guess there isn't. And the Phantom Gaming 4 Z590 board was horrible.
Yeah, it's not a good situation because a lot of companies have learnt their lesson, so to speak. Most recently, Newegg, for example. Not I'm saying that they've fully resolved that situation yet, but
they're at least open to discussion.
Yeah, we saw on Gamers Nexus channel like a full discussion between Gamers Nexus and their executives, which, again, that's sort of steps towards progress. We've had the Nvidia situation, LG situation. We've had many of these situations in the past, and each time when it gets to this stage, companies are willing to learn and improve. Whereas Asrock continues to want to manipulate things into the way they want, and I just don't think that is acceptable.
No, it's not acceptable. It's certainly not smart. They could have handled this much better. For those of you who are interested in how the relationship with Hardware Unboxed and Asrock broke down, I think it happened pretty much the same time for actually Hardcore Overclocking and Gamers Nexus as well. It happened to be the same generation, but it was the Intel Z590 stuff. And I asked Asus, Gigabyte, and MSI for their PL1 and PL2 targets for all of their boards, top to bottom. I wanted to know basically what the power limits were for each board because that was becoming a big mess with Intel. And MSI got back to me like same day with an Excel spreadsheet with all of their boards and what the PL1 and PL2 out of the box were for all of them. And that's when they started experimenting with the first time you load the BIOS, selecting the cooler you use to determine the power limits of the board. Asus and Gigabyte got back to me days later. Asrock never replied to the email. So I sent another email, didn't reply, and then sent another one. And they say, we don't have that information available for you. And I said, okay, well, what boards can you get me? Oh, we don't have any boards available at the moment. And they basically refused to provide samples. And then I sent them a few more emails. They didn't reply. I had to target different people within the company. Someone would reply confirming that person was still there. And they're just playing funny buggers. And then, wouldn't reply. And Gamers Nexus and actually Hardcore Overclocking said they did the same thing to them. And it sounds like they'll now do the same thing to Kit Guru. So, okay, going to hit part 1 there on the April but really March Q&A. So hopefully you guys enjoyed it. As I said, a good variety of questions, and we have many more coming. So there'll be a part 2. Probably won't be a part 3 this month, but, 2-parter. That'll be good. Edit that up for you guys, and you'll be able to watch it shortly. Anything you'd like to add to that, Tim? Or you just want
No, I mean, what else is there? There's the good old Patreon and Floatplane to
that's right.
sign up to if you're interested in becoming a member and you want things like the live stream that we just did on the channel.
But we'll do it again.
Yes, we're doing it again, monthly live streams. BTS videos, should be more of those coming shortly as we're starting a few different projects around the place, and just the Discord chat. Love the Discord chat. It's a great
That's always a fun place to hang out.
Yeah, I guess that's pretty much it.
Yep, I think that's everything. Good job, Tim. So, yeah, thanks for watching. 20% Club, you get 2 thumbs up, so good stuff. And thanks for watching. As I said, I'm your host, Steve.
I'm your host, Tim.
See you next time.